We have now with us Rafael Hernandez, professor at the Pontificia Universidad Javeriana Cali, and Adriana Valencia, assistant professor at the Pontificia Universidad Javeriana Cali too. Welcome, and they are going to give us a presentation about 1, 2, 3 Valle Speaks English Placement Test Pontificia Universidad Javeriana Cali experience. So the floor is yours. Remember that we need to ask questions at the end of the presentation. Thank you for being here. Welcome again.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Rafael Hernandez. I'm a professor at Pontificia Universidad Javeriana, and I am with Adriana Valencia. She's also a professor at Pontificia Universidad Javeriana Cali. We want to share our experience for something called 1, 2, 3 Valle Speaks English Placement Test at Pontificia Universidad Javeriana Cali and the governance of Valle del Cauca. The objective today for us is to share with you an assessment experience with uncertified municipalities of Valle del Cauca, as well as its impact on the public institutions selected to be part of the project. This happened in the year 2019. Basically, we're going to begin with the description of 1, 2, 3 Valle Speaks program. Then we're going to talk about the SE, that is examine the classification project. We show you some reports.
Rafael, can you start again this last slide because we lost you for a moment.
Okay, thank you very much. So basically, we want to share an assessment experience with uncertified municipalities of Valle del Cauca, and also the impact on the public institutions selected to be part of this project. This is what we're going to cover today. The first one is a description of the Valle Speaks program. We also have a description of the SE, which is Examen de Clasificación de Inglés at Pontificia Universidad Javeriana Cali. Then how both of those tests came together, blended together in the proposal of 1, 2, 3 Valle Speaks and SE Javeriana, then some reports and conclusions. Now, what is the 1, 2, 3 Valle Speaks program? Adriana?
Okay, thank you, Rafael, and thank you all for being here today. 1, 2, 3 Valle Speaks is a program from the governor's office which reinforces the English language of students and teachers of primary and secondary schools of official educational institutions in non-certified municipalities here in the department of Valle del Cauca. Next. So what do we mean by non-certified municipalities? Well, we refer to those institutions which do not have the capacity to autonomously administer the educational system in the territory. By this, we mean they are lacking of technical and administrative and financial capacity. So as you can see in the picture, in this map, there are only 8 municipalities that are in light green that are certified. So this is a big territory. So what could we do? What do we have to do next? Well, what they did was to design some strategies. Basically, they created clusters by regions because they share certain characteristics. So they defined different clusters and they implemented some strategies. In the next slide, we can see all the strategies of the program of a 1, 2, 3 Valle Speaks program. Some of them had to do with, curriculum design. Others have to do with students, with the learners, with the teachers. But the one that we are going to talk about today has to do with the assessment of the level of English of teachers and learners. of official educational institutions. So, okay, so how do we do it? Well, as Rafael mentioned at the beginning, this is a blend program. So we have to assess the teachers and students level. So we at the university, we have our English placement test, or ESI, Examen de Clasificación de Inglés. And we thought it would be a good idea to use the exam, at least part of the exam, especially with the higher learners, teenagers. So let me tell you a little bit about the history of this English placement test. Back in 2010, at the university, we were using the results of the national test, Saber 11, as a mechanism to accredit the students' level of English. This exam, as you may know, is a test that the learners, students have to present when they finish their secondary education and if they want to study at university. This exam basically evaluates certain competencies. As Adriana Wendig was saying was talking about this morning, it only evaluates reading, grammar, and vocabulary. So when the students were placed in the classes, they have to face some serious issues with English. So, but you know what? The problem even was a little bit more difficult in 2015. Why? Because in 2014, the government of Colombia launched its program, Pilo Paga, and by 2015, there were about 233 students from various regions, villages, and rural areas who entered Javeriana. Of course, these students were placed in the different English classes according to the results of Saber 11. The thing is, we do the 4 skills. So they started to struggle in the classes. Next. So in the first trimester of 2015, we designed our English placement test as a criterion to verify the students' proficiency in English. And the first students who took the exam were the Pilo Pagas, and many of them scored A1 minus. So the university created a new subject for those students who just had a very, very little knowledge of English, and the subject was called Basic English. Next. So the test basically reflects the objectives and the skills that are contained in the European framework of reference. That is the one that, governs our programs that are offered at the Language Center at the university. At first, we had just basic, we have A1, A2, and B1. Now the exam goes till B2. So let me show you the structure of the exam. Next. Basically, the exam comprises several elements. We have a listening session, reading comprehension, we have language, of course, socio-linguistic competence, which we consider very important. So, we asked certain questions that had to do the use of language that is appropriate in social contexts. And we call this conversation strategies. And also we had an oral examination and a written part. Next.
Having that in mind, with the history of the placement test, of the English placement test at Javeriana, then we got a job from the governor's office for us to measure the level of English of the students at the institutions, at the public institutions around Valle del Cauca, the uncertified municipalities around Valle del Cauca. What we did was to take the test that we already had, and then we did some adaptations, and then we created this new proposal, which was called 123 Valle Speaks and ESI Javeriana Cali. What was the procedure? Basically, the first one was the planning. Of course, since it was supposed to be applied on paper-based, we have to say that the placement test at Javeriana is applied on an online platform, and it was not possible to apply it this way on these municipalities because some of them were very far away rural areas. We needed to adapt it to paper-based exam. So we need to create like a planning structure, reviewing schedules, identify the dates of application, because also the Secretary of Education and the contractor needed to give us the days and the times in which the tests were going to be applied. Of course, we needed to do the assign of rooms and dates and times and teachers. For us, it was at the beginning a challenge to divide the whole department into 3 zones. We divided into the North Zone, which was based on Cartago. The Center Zone of the department was based in Tuluá, and the South and Cali Zone was based on Cali. And we needed to train teachers, hire teachers and train teachers on this new procedure, keeping in mind that probably it was the first time that these students were going to face one of these kind of tests, kind of international standard test, and with the motivation filters that they may have, etc., etc. Then we had the calling by Talentum, which was the company that was in charge of applying the test, and then we designed a new test, keeping in mind the structure that we already had for the ESI and the new requirements that Talentum was asking us. Then we continued to the test administration. In the test administration, we had to create and share folders with formats, booklets. We had to create a system for verification of identity and attendance of candidates, the delivery of booklets and answer sheets, the collection of booklets and answer sheets, and also the management of the results. Then we had the results processing, and finally, we wrote some writing reports. So as you can see, the process may seem to be very simple, but once you give the whole picture, when you get the whole picture, you see that it's a little bit more complicated than you might have thought at the beginning. We had some requirements, some special requirements from Talentum. It was supposed to be paper-based because, as I said before, many of these public institutions do not have access to internet or to laptops for the students to take the test. So that's why we needed to do some adaptations and to put it on paper-based. And it also needed to be applied in remote rural areas. It was a very challenging experience, but it was a very rewarding, a very rewarding experience to see the faces of these students, to face the opportunity to be in contact with a kind of international standardized test for the first time. It was for them challenging, but also motivational. We also covered the 4 skills: listening, speaking, writing, and reading comprehension. We needed to create some systems to give the reports in a very detailed fashion, and we had to be ready for adaptations and for changes on the go. What we did at Javeriana to fulfill the requirements was to take the platform-based test and to adapt it to a paper-based. Then we created booklets. We also created the answer sheets. We tried to create very simple answer sheets for the students to avoid possible misunderstandings and mistakes in terms of not understanding the instructions, etc., etc. We also had to hire some staff, and we also had to train that staff. And as I said before, we divided the whole department into North, Center, and Cali South. We created the figures of coordinators. We also created the assistants, and we had to deal with transportation issues in some very remote areas. Inside the university, there was the participation of different offices within the Pontificia Universidad Javeriana. We had the Continuous Education Office, the Languages Center, the Office of Javi Virtual, which is in charge of the platform, the Informatics Services Office, the Communications Office, the School of Humanities, the Faculty of Teachers, etc., etc. So there was a big involvement of staff and offices inside the university in order to fulfill the requirements that we needed to accomplish with this project. Then here, we created the Examen de Clasificación de Inglés ESI Kids, and this exam was aimed to measure the levels A1 and A2. And this one was designed for children aged 8 years old and over in the 4th grade studying at high schools in Valle del Cauca, Colombia. This test assesses the student English language skills from A1 to A2. It was divided into listening. It was taken by 30 minutes and 10 points. Reading, including vocabulary and grammar, 60 minutes, 20 points. The writing composition, 30 minutes, 10 points. And an interview for oral production and interaction for 10 minutes, 10 points. We also created another test, which was called Examen de Clasificación de Inglés, ESI Teens. But this one was measuring the level from A1 to B1. The ESI Teens exam was designed for teenagers 8, 12 to 18 in 9th and 11th grades, studying at high schools in Valle del Cauca, Colombia. This test assesses the students' English language skills from A1 to B1. It has a very similar structure to the previous one: listening, 30 minutes, 10 points. Reading, including vocabulary and grammar, 60 minutes, 20 points. Writing composition, 30 minutes, 10 points, and an oral production through an interview, 10 minutes and 10 points. Now, when it came to the reports, it is really important to mention that we needed to give detailed reports, and for this we needed to articulate our results with different offices inside the Javeriana University, because we needed to give the contractor every single report from every single municipality, from every single school or high school. So we had 17 municipalities around the Valle del Cauca, from Alcalá to Zarzal. We had 51 primary and high schools with the lowest AVED Pro test results on English in the year 2018. They were the selected sample. And this is the amount of tests that we had to apply. The total of students was 1,852. For ESI Kids, we had 934. For ESI Teens in grade 9th, 161, and ESI Teens in grade 10th, 757. And we have to mention that we had to apply the test twice with a very slight changes, because they were intended to measure the level of entrance and the level of exit. And in the middle, there was a pedagogical intervention done by the contractor. So you had to multiply this number by 2. Then we found very interesting things, very interesting facts about the results. If you can see, most of the population that took the exam didn't have a level of English that was even measurable. That's why the criteria for the results were sin nivel. Sin nivel means that the level was lower than the lowest level of measurable level of English. So this was really interesting for us to find that the intervention, the pedagogical intervention, was really needed in these institutions, because the level of English of these students were really low. And after the intervention, the levels were slightly higher. So it worked. Now, as I said, we had 17 municipalities from Alcalá to Zarzal, in fact, 51 primary high schools. And we needed to create these descriptors from the level A1.1. It is in Spanish because it was a special requirement from the contractor. And this is the highest, the level B2.3, on every single part of the skills evaluated or assessed. Now, what were the conclusions? The conclusions, according to the methodology, is that the careful planning is a must. I mean, when it comes to these kinds of projects, you need to keep in mind the logistics and the many variables that can intervene or interfere in the good development of the process. I remember that one of the teachers forgot the answer sheets in one of the schools, and she had to come back in a 2 hours right way just to get them back because we needed to process the results immediately in real time. So this is something that the people need to keep in mind. The test conditions may determine results. And after its timing, for example, 2 hours and 10 minutes, the environment and the technological resources can also infer in the results of the exams. The test represents for many learners the first experience before an instrument with an international standardized design. It was barely new for them. It was challenging for them, but it was also very rewarding because they took it very naturally with a lot of excitement, and they were really thankful. Although the learners became familiar with the test, the language skills are a real limitation. And this is logic because the Prueba Saber Pro was showing that they had the lowest level of English according to the state test, but we also could prove it with the application of this test. The listening tasks are more challenging to both kids and teens, probably because of the lack of exposure to the language. We also had some conclusions in terms of the overall things. The test revision must be a permanent process. Right now, the ESI at Javeriana is going through another revision process in order to make it more robust, in order to make it more valid. But also the test design is a never-ending process. So once you create your own test, it is never enough. I mean, every single day, it can be a little bit more perfect. The tests are instruments for assessment, but we have to keep in mind that the assessment is not a test. So they're not the only instruments for assessment. And we need to support culture of assessment in which teachers, policymakers, and administrators care to know what assessment results they produce and how these results relate to desired outcomes. Because sometimes the policymakers are having dreams, but those dreams are too high for the reality of our communities. With this experience at the Pontificia Universidad Javeriana Cali, we could see the reality of the whole department of Valle del Cauca in terms of language learning, language assessing, etc., etc. And with this, we thank you very much for your attention. And I guess we have 5 minutes to answer possible questions. I am going to share some pictures that we took throughout the process, how picturesque the schools were. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adriana and Rafael. Let's see if we have any questions from the audience. Thank you very much for such an insightful presentation. We have a question from Harriet Gardner. Can you say more about the test itself? Maybe I missed how many skills it covered.
Yes, it covered the full skills because it was a requirement from the project. So it covered the listening, the reading comprehension, writing, and oral production and interaction.
Thank you, Rafael.
Yes. With these beautiful landscapes,
It's important to say that the test was also submitted through a triangulation process. So there were some experts who designed the exam, and there were several experts on language teaching and language assessment, especially language assessment, who reviewed the exam and made some suggestions, very important suggestions.
Yep.
We have another comment and question from Harriet. Great to hear it covered 4 skills. Were kids stronger on some skills than others?
Well, actually, yes. As I mentioned at the conclusion, when it comes to listening skills, it proved to be the lowest skill developed by the students. So probably it is the lack of exposure to the language from these remote rural areas, but the listening was the lowest of them all.
Right.
And also the the environment, the classrooms themselves, they did not have the technological support for the
Access.
children. So we have to take it from the university, from Cali, to those places. And yes, Rafael mentioned, students, especially the kids, were not used to authentic listening to authentic material. So that made difficult or have an impact on the results.
Yeah, it added definitely more difficulty to the test.
So we have our last question because we need to move to the plenary. What was the hardest part of a project from Harriet? Another question.
The hardest.
Well, the hardest part was the logistics because it was at the beginning. You don't kind of scope the whole impact of these kind of projects. You say, like, for example, okay, yes, we are going to apply the test to see the level of entrance and exit and etc., etc. But then when you see the whole picture, then you can realize how many offices inside the university, how many logistics problems are going to be intervening, how many variables you need to control, etc., etc. So I would say that the hardest problem was the logistics of the project itself.
Right. So thank you once again, Adriana and Rafael.
Thank you very much.
For sharing your project. So please now join the main stage for our last plenary, the closing ceremony, and the networking activity.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.